Welcome back to Combat Mission Cold War for the introduction to the traditional annual winter turn-by-turn series. If you're new to the channel or you haven't found one of the old ones yet, this is the time of year when I take a break from making the documentary style AARs and play through a multiplayer game, recording every turn live and uploading a turn a day. This is a very different experience to the AARs. You get to see me actually playing the game, which can be helpful if you're new to Combat Mission. You can get to see me working things out, deciding what to do and how to do it. You also get to see me tearing my hair out as it all goes wrong, or I realise about 5 minutes in that I've made a terrible mistake somewhere already and have just torpedoed my chance at victory. Hand in hand with the turn-by-turn is the Adopt a Pixel Truppen initiative. It's possible to rename all of the unit commanders in the Force Selector, so it's also become traditional to ask viewers to submit their names so they can follow their adopted Pixel Truppen on the path to digital glory. Or, considerably more likely, follow them to their embarrassing demise. This is always really popular. I had over 400 names to fit in last year, so it's a bit of a lottery because there's not 400 units. Patreon and YouTube members are at the front of the queue, but it is open to everyone. I'll make a community post here on YouTube for people to sign up and pin a link to that down in the comments. This year we're fighting a scenario rather than a quick battle. While I love building my own force for QBs, there's always an element of unpredictability that goes along with that. Battles can be won and lost in the force selection phase before the game even starts. It's easy to turn up with a force that you think is going to perform well, only for your opponent to have hard countered you already. That's not a bad thing for playing Combat Mission. As far as I'm concerned, force selection is a totally legitimate place to win. But the chance of having a dynamic, interesting game that's fun for you guys to watch goes down a bit. The advantage of a scenario is that the mission maker, in this case me, can balance everything out in advance. The other reason for going with a scenario this year is that we can turn it into a bit of a community event again. 2 years ago we had the Road to Damascus campaign, which was a bit of a proof of concept. Now I've refined it a bit so it's easier to process at my end and some muppet isn't going to screw it up. It's not a campaign, it's a single mission, but it'll be really interesting collecting the results and seeing how everyone does, who controls which objectives at the end, and what the overall butcher's bill is when we agglomerate all the data. Like last time, I'll set up a file request using Dropbox for people to submit their end screens. More information on that when everything kicks off. The scenario in question then is called Persian Predicament. The setting of Combat Mission Cold War lends itself to high-intensity mechanised combat in Europe, which is great. But the world is a big place, and there are plenty of other areas where less symmetrical NATO and Soviet forces could potentially clash. One of those places is the Middle East, and thanks to Combat Mission Cold War's NTC tile set, we can have a pretty good stab at creating desert battlefields to fight over. Matching that up to potential strategic objectives for either side, it wasn't a big leap to invent a flashpoint in Iran. We'll get onto the full backstory in a minute, but the quick version is that we have a US airborne unit defending an airfield against Soviet reconnaissance forces. So on one side we have dismounted US infantry with a handful of jeeps to get about in. On the other we have successive waves of BRDMs, BTRs and finally BMPs backed up by T-72s. Very asymmetric forces. The Americans start closer to the objectives and can infest the airbase buildings, but really need to be careful with their limited anti-tank weapons. The Soviets have a clear superiority in mobility and firepower, but are going to have to move dangerously fast to actually lever that superiority to secure the objectives. The plan right now is to open the Adopt a Pixel Truppen initiative right now, on the 20th of December, let that run for a week over Christmas, then input the names, get the battle started and build up a buffer zone of complete turns before kicking off the actual series on the 3rd of January. It's going to be a lot of fun. But to close out this video, we've got a kind of mini war room episode explaining how US and Soviet troops ended up fighting in Iran in 1980. 16th of January 1979. The revolution in Iran comes to a head. Shah Mohammad Pahlavi leaves the country for exile in Egypt. 1st of February, Ayatollah Khomeini returns to Iran. 11th of February, in the face of pro-Khomeini uprisings, the Iranian Supreme Military Council declares its neutrality. Revolutionaries seize control of Tehran. As government control disintegrates, the Kurdish and Arab minorities living along the Iranian border with Iraq stage armed uprisings. 31st of March. In the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini declares victory in a referendum on creating an Islamic Republic. Opposing factions dispute the claimed 99% vote in favour and further violence erupts. Iran teeters on the brink of civil war. 5th of June. Afghanistan's unpopular ruling People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan asks for Soviet help putting down uprisings in the east and southeast of the country. Although publicly reluctant, the Soviet Union increases the volume of military support it is already providing to the government in Kabul. August the 3rd. Mustafa Madani, on the Central Committee of the Marxist Organization of Iranian People's Fedai Guerrillas, attends a press conference in Moscow where he denounces the new regime in Tehran. Training camps spring up in the Caucasus and Turkmenistan border regions to support communist insurgents in northern Iran. 24th of December. The Soviet Union occupies Afghanistan. Soon after, Soviet arms and advisors begin to percolate across the border to support communist guerrilla groups operating in eastern Iran. Confronted with multiple peripheral insurgencies and bitter factional infighting centered on Tehran, the new Islamic Republic struggles to assert itself. 23rd January 1980. Responding to the buildup of Soviet troops in western Afghanistan, US President Carter announces the Carter Doctrine in his State of the Union address.
Let our position be absolutely clear. An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States of America, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force.
28th of February. The Soviet Union begins preparations for exercise Zapad-80, mobilizing and concentrating significant forces in Poland and East Germany. Concerned that the build-up may be a precursor for war, NATO responds in kind. 1st of March. US plans to activate the Rapid Deployment Joint Task Force in order to enforce the Carter Doctrine in the Persian Gulf are delayed by the threat of crisis in Europe. Although RDJTF headquarters is established at Fort McDill, Florida, the forces set to be assigned are held by US Readiness Command in anticipation of deployment to the European theatre. 4th of March. The Soviet Union invades Iran. While pincers from the Azerbaijan and Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republics close on Tehran in the north, a secondary force crosses the Afghan-Iranian border at Zabul and drives on the port of Bandar Abbas, seeking to block the Straits of Hormuz. Organised Iranian resistance is fragmentary and patchy, with what government forces that can be assembled concentrating in the north around Tehran. 5th of March. RDJTF is ordered to preemptively seize Bandar Abbas in order to deter the Soviets from advancing to the Persian Gulf. Assuming command of elements scattered across the continental United States, Europe, and the Indian and Pacific Oceans, the only asset actually in theatre is Task Force 74, centered on the carrier USS Coral Sea in the Arabian Sea. RDJTF will have to rely on Task Force 74 until access to bases on the Arabian Peninsula can be negotiated. 8th of March. Steaming north for the Gulf of Oman, Task Force 74 detects and aggressively prosecutes a suspected Soviet submarine, probably operating out of the port of Aden in Yemen. Task Force 74 loses contact with the sub in the late evening. As the USS Coral Sea begins to recover its anti-submarine warfare aircraft, an S-3 Viking crashes into the flight deck. In the chaos of wreckage, burning fuel and secondary explosions, reports of a submarine attack make their way to Washington. The US government convulses for 2 hours as it struggles to decide whether the Soviet Union has initiated a conventional shooting war before the facts of the accident can be confirmed. As the tension dies down and the Coral Sea's crew brings the fires under control, it's evident that the carrier is out of action and will need significant repairs before it is fit for service again. Task Force 74 turns back south. 9th of March. The United States succeeds in negotiating access to Kasab Airport in Oman and Al Minhab Air Base in the United Arab Emirates. F-4E Phantom IIs of the 68th and 69th Fighter Squadrons, 347th Tactical Fighter Wing, quickly transfer over from their staging areas in Europe, followed by flights of C-141 Starlifters and C-130 Hercules. The transports shuttle back and forth between Europe and the Gulf, building the logistical foundation to support air operations, more tactical fighter squadrons, and the army units slated for deployment, principally the 82nd Airborne and 24th Infantry Divisions. 11th of March. 347th Tactical Fighter Wing begins conducting fighter sweeps over southern Iran. The Iranians protest, but are paralysed and fragmented by the Soviet invasion. Flying racetrack patterns over the city of Bam, a flight of Phantoms encounters 4 Soviet MiG-21s operating out of the captured airport at Zahedan. The American and Soviet aircraft shadow each other warily until one of the MiGs fires a missile. Reacting immediately, the Phantoms splash all 4 Soviet fighters for no loss. The United States announces the incident, declaring it acted in self-defense. The Soviet Union denies knowledge and accuses Washington of staging a provocation. 12th of March. Identifying Route 91 as the most direct route through the central Iranian range to Bandar Abbas, RDJTF orders 347th Fighter Wing to bomb the road tunnels between Bam and Jiroft. After several failed attempts to collapse the tunnel entrances from the air, RDJTF dispatches a US Special Forces team from Kasab Air Base to get the job done from the ground. Inserted by parachute, the Green Berets secure the Day tunnel and begin to prepare it for demolition. As they're doing so, Soviet Mi-8 helicopters arrive and deploy GRU reconnaissance teams in an attempt to seize the vital choke points. Under pressure, the Green Berets detonate the atomic demolition munition they were emplacing. The nuclear explosion effectively seals the Day tunnel, forcing the Soviets to take a 250-kilometer detour via Kerman and Serdaj, but the detonation cannot be hidden or disguised. The Soviet Union condemns the US use of a tactical nuclear weapon in a third world state, decrying the act as a blatant disregard for the dangers of escalation. 14th of March. Soviet lead elements reach Kerman and secure the airfield there against minimal Iranian resistance. The MiG-21s operating out of Zahedan begin to transfer over, the closer basing improving their ability to contest the southern Iranian skies against the American Phantoms. 15th of March. The Battle of Hajiabad. Backed up by US Green Berets, a polyglot force of Iranian army troops and anti-communist insurgents attempt to delay the Soviet vanguard as it navigates the mountain passes on either side of the city of Hajiabad. The Soviets blast through the ambushes and hasty defences, in no small part thanks to the relocated MiGs attacking US Phantoms attempting to provide close air support. The Americans only lose a single F-4 in exchange for 3 MiG-21s over the course of the day, but again and again, Soviet interceptions force the Americans to drop their payloads before they're in position to impact the ground battle. 16th of March. Enough 82nd Airborne elements have accumulated at Al Minhab in the UAE to form a battalion task force. With the Soviets bearing down on Bandar Abbas, RDJTF orders a hasty parachute assault. Dubbed Task Force Ridgeway, the battalion drops to the west of the city, intending to secure Havadaya Air Base and create an air corridor back across the Gulf. Alpha Company, landing on the airbase itself, is reorganizing on the ground as the lead Soviet reconnaissance battalion rushes in from the east. Protected from American close air support by a sudden surge of MiGs, the Soviets have only a brief window to kick Alpha Company off Havadaya before the paratroopers can dig in and fix any attackers in place for destruction by the Phantoms. The Battle of Havadaya Air Base is about to begin.